This debate takes place in 2 points of context. First, it takes place in any country where certain markets are extremely volatile and may not be able to accommodate for any single person who tries to get into that course. But secondly, we recognize that there are certain markets in those same places which are undervalued. Like for example, in the Philippines, you have arts courses which aren't necessarily prepared as much in the future. That's why this kind of policy is something that we need to account for. What's the problem given that kind of context? Two simple levels. First, we think that there is a need for multifaceted skills given the context where these markets are able to crumble in any instance. Because in some instances, you are the victim of an underemployment in these kinds of places where, by the time you graduate, since like from the start when you graduate or like you applied for a business course, the moment you graduate from that sector, like when you go out into the world, you find that that country has a weak business course and you might not be able to be accommodated into that instance. But secondly, the problem there is that with being a victim of underemployment, you are forced to work in obscure places or in obscure companies, something that you did not even consent to. We want to prevent you from going into those kinds of instances. But secondly, in as much as we want to respect your choice to be a fine arts graduate in that kind of instance, we think that there is an urgency to create a safety net for you, assuming you are able to be forced to like deal with the hardships the moment you graduate from these instances. What are we going to propose to you at government side? We think that we're going to follow the process of forcing everyone, and this is a coercive process we concede, to go into a multidisciplinary course. But as much as possible, we want to subsidize that multidisciplinary process so that if you're impoverished, you can possibly get into the same college that you want to, even if it costs more. We're fine with like subsidizing it as much as possible. We'll also go through like the regular processes of how to get into the college, like the application process, those national tests that we want to do as much as possible, something that we're still going to be fine with as much as possible. But the main goal of this debate is to be able to do two things at government side. One, find a way to be able to reform education so that we can compensate and accommodate everyone who decides to follow their own passions and is unfortunately affected by these atrocities the moment that they graduate from these countries at the end of the day. But secondly, we also want to help students that try to take part in college for those very same reasons, because we want to respect that they subscribe to that college, of the choices that they make, and everything else unfortunately affected in this context that we provided to you. I'm going to talk to you about two simple arguments. How firstly, let's describe to you the role of education and why there is a need to create a coercive policy such as this. But secondly, let's also talk to you about how there's a strong impetus given our policy to improve educational reform in several areas and across the board. But lastly, if I have time, let's go away these ideas and let's tell you why our side is able to accommodate for everyone in the long run. Let's go to the first level. Because we think that with regards to the role of education, especially with regards to this policy, we think that it's all about being able to allow you to have access to several opportunities. Because we recognize those opportunities are life skills that you're able to use in the future the moment that you graduate from college. Sit down. And we think that that kind of ability for you to access your opportunities depends on the accessibility of choices that given to you. Like the fact that if I'm an impoverished person and I'm forced only by my choice to actually go into a business course or a fisheries course because my parents tell me that it's the best way to make a buck or it's the best way to make as much money as possible, we think that that's something that we're going to talk about later on. But simply put, the premise is the reason why in this regard to how the role of education works, they already have instances where it's coercive in different levels. The fact that you have specialized schools all around the country or in any kind of instance that force you to take science courses the moment that you graduate from that high school, or the idea that you subscribe to several universities which have various values in itself means that the moment you subscribe to those kinds of values, you are coerced into doing certain values, you're coerced into doing certain beliefs. We think that that's something that aligns itself with this coercion. But more importantly, we think that with regards to your free choice and why we need to be able to limit that in some instances, we think that it can't be a value if the avenues that we see you are exercising are not going to help you in the long run, even if it's your passion, even if it's something that you're forced into. And I'm going to clarify that later on. But here's the thing. How does the role of education apply with regards to helping people? And I'm going to talk to you about two levels. Firstly, on how we're able to protect the impoverished in society, but secondly, it's also catered to the people who have very passionate dreams, who want to subscribe to fine arts, and how do you also protect them in the same breath. Let's look at the impoverished people under status quo. Sit down. We think that they work on a short-term mindset because these are people who are forced by their parents to take courses such as tourism or fisheries if you're in another university in the University of the Philippines. The problem with these kinds of people is that they have a lack of flexibility, especially when that course will only be able to benefit you for certain 3 or 4 years. The problem with that is that since you have a lack of flexibility, the moment that's, for example, the call center industry or the fisheries industry becomes so weak in that country after a certain amount of time, you have a lack of flexibility accessibility and you don't have any other options to be able to access because you're only forced to exercise that single course, we think that our policy serves that on the first level. But secondly, we think that with regards to dreams, and in that same breath, you also have a lot of people who are afraid to follow their interests. Like, for example, in the same breath, you have people who are forced to take, like, I don't know, business courses by their parents, and they tell them, they ridicule you for, like, trying to decide, whether, like, if you want to take fine arts courses because, you know, fine arts won't do you good in this country because it has a weak market, it has a weak return in that kind of investment. That's something that we want to save at government side. Sit down. We think that the reason this policy is going to cater to that as well is because when these universities and when these companies see that the state is endorsing a policy such as this, it tells these same people that we are willing to support your interests and your passions at the same time. We think that that reason, at the very end of the day, means that on our end goal on the first argument, we're able to give a huge return investment for these people. Because one, with regards to that end goal, we're not just only able to help students because we create safety nets and backups by which they're able to access the moment they become more flexible on the government side. But secondly, with regards to the investment that they're able to return or able to achieve after that policy is implemented, we think that the money and time that they spent investing on those multidisciplinary courses will be able to at least be returned to them with a justified benefit, and that's something that we're willing to stand up the government side. But here's the last argument. Why is there a strong impetus to improve educational reform? Because we think that in several countries that are affected by our context, governments subjectively fund certain countries on the basis that these schools with specialized attribution to like teaching certain courses, they tell them that they tell these students to subscribe into those places because we'll be able to benefit the most when you subscribe to a business school, for example. We think that that allows for other schools to have like a weak market in the outcome. Like for example, when you try to subscribe to an art school in a country where art isn't necessarily the strongest market, the problem there is that you don't necessarily uphold the interests of other people who are coerced into that idea. But more importantly, we think that when it improves education across the board, you're able to at least further value that certain courses have a weight into them and that's something that can be respected in the same line as business courses. We think that in conclusion, simply, we think we want to protect the interests of other people who try to subscribe to universities. But more importantly, we think that this is a safety net that government side is willing to stand for. Thanks.
Mr. Speaker, it's a shame that their side of the House wanted to solve the problem of accessibility and the problem of the poor not going to school. But the only thing they managed to change here is to force them into doing something they may not want to do and forcing them to do something that they will never want to do. We think that's abhorrent. We think that their problem is their solution doesn't solve the problem of status quo, and I'll show you that in my rebuttals. Firstly, they talked about how this happens in a world with volatile markets, but they also wanted to tell us that they would subsidize education. This doesn't make any sense, right? Because if you want to be able to subsidize education for people who are poor, you also need to be able to have a volatile market. So what you do on their side of the House is that governments will be less likely to cater to these people and provide education that's of high quality. So what happens then to these people is not only are they being forced to do something they don't want, secondly, what happens to them is that they're being offered education that might not be of quality and might not even give them the success they wanted to achieve on their side. Secondly, on the idea of how they wanted to empower accessibility of choice, especially to the poor, right? And they told us how they, no thanks, wanted to battle the coercion by parents. Now I have three responses to this. Number one, if their problem is accessibility, you don't need to force people to take degrees, right? All you had to do was subsidize education, and we told you how that doesn't happen on their side. Secondly, and if you want to talk about parents who are going to force their children to go in anyway, we don't think the idea of forcing people necessarily solves that problem, right? Because parents will always want to be able to put their children at what they want to do. So we think that their problem still exists and they don't solve anything. Lastly, and they also wanted to argue that these people would be then forced to places like fishing or places like agriculture. We think that in the interest of these people who are poor, the best thing to do is to be able to empower these individuals and let them do whatever they want with their life and not force them to do double things that they may not want to do at the end of the day. Now I have two things to say on the side of opposition. Number one, I'm going to tell you why it's absolutely abhorrent to violate choice, and secondly, I'm going to tell you how their side further makes lower quality graduates. Firstly, because we say that the state has to empower choice of an individual, especially considering that these university graduates, no thanks, are people who've just been able to grow up and just able to be able to choose what they want to do with their lives and how they want to plan their lives, right? We say that more often than not, by the time they're in university, they've already made the decision on whether, hey, I want to study medicine, or hey, I want to study education. So what happens on the side of government when they violate choice is, no thanks, they force all graduates to go into subjects they may want to do. Like, say, I wanted medicine, but now I also have to study something else instead. So what happens then on their side is that even because you make it harder for people to study things they may have wanted to enjoy in the first place. So you make it harder for these individuals to be able to pursue the things they want to do with their lives or things they want to achieve in their lives and achieve the goals they want. Now, I have two harms for this. Number one, in principle, what happens then is that you take away the universal right of an individual to choose whatever they want to do with their life and future. You force them and you dictate them to do what you want as a state. Secondly, the tangible harm is this. You produce students who are more likely to find it hard to focus in studying. No thanks. You have students who won't wholeheartedly study things. So maybe I get like an A+ in medicine, but I get, say, a C in my other subjects. You see, this happens to these students, and you have students who don't achieve at the end of the day. Because now, in conclusion, we see that under their side of the house, they violate choice and they therefore make it harder to produce performing students. They need to prove to us why it's okay for the state to dictate the lives of an individual. But before my second argument, yes.
Why is it that in grade school we teach students multiple subjects if only in college they're just going to take math?
Well, the difference here is that when you're in grade school, it's something compulsory, right? And it's something that everyone has to do. These are things that are basic to be able to grow up in your life. Because even in status quo, you have a choice whether or not you want to go to university or not. And we think that we need to preserve that choice. Now, second argument on how we better produce higher quality graduates. Because in status quo, we see that the reason people go to university in the first place is to be able to study specific things, specific degrees, and be able to plan like what job or career path they want to take. This means that if I want to be a doctor, I have to take a specific doctoring degree, not something, I don't go and study doctor. I study things like medicine. I study things like physiology. No, thank you. Now, we see that because they're able to choose a specific thing, it's more likely that these people will be able to specialize on the thing they study. Meaning to say, if I'm able to get a bachelor's in medicine, I'm more likely to be able to want to continue studying in master's, studying in PhD. I'm more likely to be able to want to further my education and further make myself able to achieve the job I want at the end of the day. Now, what happens to the quality of focus on their side of the house? We think that under their side, they're forced to be able to study a certain subject at a certain amount of time because they've already conceded to the fact that some people are poor. This means if I want to study two subjects in 2 semesters, I have to be forced to study those in that time because people are not able to study those things, say, in 2 years because they can't afford it. No thanks. We think that under their side, they make the poor lose out even more because now not only are they forced to study 2 things in a short time, or they're forced to be able to study these things at a longer amount of time at a higher cost. Yeah. Now, what are the few harms we have on our side? First thing, specialization of jobs. No, thank you. We think that we have individuals who cannot easily specialize in this job or field or further their career as far or as quickly as they want to. Because now they have to spend more time or more energy or more money on the focus of their job. We think what happens then is that either either they spend more time specializing, or either you get less people who are specialized in their job. So you have less people who are specialized in things like computer science, things like physiology, which are needed in society. Second harm, they waste the time and money of individuals who cannot afford to use that time and money. Meaning to say that these people have to spend more time studying something or spend more money spending something. So you take away precious time that could have been used by a university graduate to forward, be with their co-curriculars or be able to do to get job experience. So in conclusion, what happens to their side of the house is not only do they disadvantage the poor, but they also have less quality of the people working on their side. They need to come up here and tell us why exactly is it necessary if you're going to take the time and the money of these individuals. Because if their side wanted to defend the poor, they need to tell us exclusively why their policy caters to them. If you want to side with people who are happy and people who can do their jobs properly, go with side opposition.
Thank you very much for that speech. I call upon the next speaker, the Deputy Prime Minister,
This mic doesn't even work, right? Okay. Mr. Chair, we absolutely abhor that the previous speaker's main problem in this debate is that students won't have enough time to pursue other subjects that they might like as more than another subject. Therefore, their dislike of another subject is going to bring their ability to study down. Therefore, that waste of time equals we shouldn't push students to their fullest potential. That completely disregarded the biggest point of my previous speaker. They failed to give us a standard about why spending, let's say, 2 to 4 more years in school is supposed to equate to the exact amount of money you would have by taking a job in the same time in their policy. Without that standard, they can't necessarily tell us that students are going to have a better time on their side. So what am I going to tell you? I'm going to tell you, after clarifying a lot of the problems on their first speaker, how our educational system is, like, by accurately representing reality and teaching students things like the realities of not getting unemployed, teach them to, sort of value their choices and stand by the courses they pick, even if they are unpopular picks. Before that, I have a lot of responses to make for the previous speaker. The first thing is that we want to go back to our previous speaker and use those arguments to rebut the previous speaker, because it's like she didn't even listen to my first speaker's case. The two main things that my first speaker told you is that their side makes students who are afraid to take risks. Why? Because we told you that if you're just going to force this idea that, yeah, you should always take singular education if you want to, because you assume that you already know what you want by the time you reach college, then therefore, if you're like, let's say the job market does not favor the kind of course you took, then it's harder for you to want to take that chance and take that job, especially if it has nothing to do with your course. But secondly, what my previous speaker told you is that schools are supposed to, forced to accommodate more students taking courses and therefore reform the education. How did he prove this, and what did they not listen to? He told you that it's the incentive to reform happens when you force more students to take these certain courses. So obviously universities will want to compete with each other to take the best for let's say art students or best business students. He said that an additional benefit is that, let's say, in certain scenarios where certain universities are let's say dominating in a certain kind of field, let's say NUS is the best at training medical students, the ability for students to pick more courses incentivizes universities to also compete with other universities to enhance the quality of their own courses. Okay, Next, now let's respond the previous speaker's case. After my responses, why don't we just subsidize singular education? Is the very first problem that the previous speaker gives us. Why is this such a small problem in terms of the great scheme of the debate that my partner gave you? We told you that our problem was never that the state has not enough money to subsidize people and give them education. Because we said that we would try to do that, and yes, the ability to get more sponsors happens when, universities are able to get a lot of students. That's how sponsors happen. But we say that our problem is that students don't always know what they want. Therefore, even if you just keep subsidizing singular education, even on your side you're pushing students to only pick one avenue, even if on your side you don't explicitly force them. But secondly, on the idea that students don't know what they want, they never proved why. Like, students automatically do know what they want by college. That's why we told you that in primary and secondary education, we do give them a wide array of subjects that teach them about what exactly they want before they go to college. They never proved to us why, even on their side, you're going to restrict their ability to want to take these courses. The only thing we did tell you, and this another point, is the misrepresentation of our policy, is that we told you when we were forcing students to take more than one course, we didn't say that we were just going to force them to take any course that was in the list. We still did say that we gave them the right of choice insofar as picking the courses that they want. So they could still pick complementary courses. It's in the info slide. Listen to the debate. Please respond. But lastly, we said that even if it costs, let's say, and this is their best case, that students won't be able to do as well in a certain subject because they don't like the other subject, they're being forced to take on our policy, we're going to go hardline and say that's perfectly fine. That's something we're willing to take. Because what is going to happen? Even if we say it on our side, some impoverished people are going to drop out. Some people won't be able to handle the stresses of college. What we are going to say is that the people who graduate are smarter, are more willing to be vigilant and flexible in the job market. That's something we're willing to have because generally people will know better on our side and they will have access to more options. Before I go to my argument, go.
Our burden today isn't to prove why it's better to take singular education. Our burden is to prove why there's more harm on your side when you have this policy. Please engage.
Okay, all you're basically saying is that, singular education is a good thing, therefore we shouldn't force everybody to take two courses. We told you from the very first speaker that the reason why you have people take two courses is because we contextualize that students don't always know what they want and students generally are afraid to take risks. That's why all the time your side just keeps on forcing them to or implicitly forcing them to pick these singular courses. Even more, we say, if your side is going to tell us that doctors can afford to pick the jobs they want, therefore they can't pick a course they want, if on your side you're going to contextualize people who can afford to be doctors, those people don't really have a problem. This debate is about generally impoverished people who, we contextualize, are generally afraid to take risks because they understand that normally they don't have the ability to compete with other people who had formal, more skilled education and training. So the policy helps them by giving them access to other courses and forcing them to take the access to those courses regardless of if they like them or not. So let's go to the argument. What's the point of context? We say that generally schools have to train students for reality. That's why the idea of teaching them for the reality of employment and the difficulty of finding jobs already exists in schools. That's why we teach them. We allow fraternities, organizations, and generally the circulation of thought. Because even in certain classes, professors do challenge you to challenge the way thoughts work or the kinds of arguments you're going, because we admit that in college, high-level education is currently dominating. What does that point of context mean to our policy? Given that we told you that students are generally afraid to take risks, and students are obviously on their side are more willing to take a singular course because it's the faster way to graduation, what our policy is willing to trade off for that fast track to graduation is the ability to stand by your choice. Why? Even on our worst case, where we say that students won't like the other course that they end up picking, even though we did tell you that they can pick their own course, their ability to stand by the course they choose is stronger on our side. So even if it was an unpopular choice to take modern liberal arts or something, they come out forced, even through that forced idea, because even though they have a fallback, they can stand by that choice because they know that all the training they went through during school and the ability to be forced into it means that once they come out of it, they will be more trained than other people. So even if they don't get the job, even if they do have a hard time struggling in the work environment at 7, we say that students will still be more empowered by their choices because they ended up passing through that harsh education system and they came out of it alive. That empowers them to take more choices that may not be the same as their own jobs, that empowers them to do better in the own jobs that they pick and to delve into deeper fields of thought that we just don't think can happen on opposition side. Thanks.
Alright, thank you very much for that speech. I call upon the next speaker, the Deputy Leader of Opposition. Yeah.
We find it incredibly shameful that side government did not want to engage with anything that Dina has spent time on. When she told you how at the end of the day there are tangible harms that exist if they choose to push this policy, they failed to engage and they still refuse to, even though we asked a POI. Before I go into my substantive and present a new substantive material on how exactly the lives of these university graduates will look like at the end of the day, I would first like to respond to what both speakers have said coming up from side government. Firstly, we find that there's a principal contradiction coming up from their side, right? We do not believe that side government can randomly change their characterization whenever they want. When they tell us how the government has not enough money to expand the market, but we have money to subsidize more people. But in their second speech, they tell us how we have more money, so it's okay. That's principally inconsistent. Because if they have the money, the solution to less unemployment rate wouldn't be to have more people have more degrees, but much more rather expand the job market to cater to the people on the ground. Therefore, there is a problem-solution mismatch coming up from their side. But secondly, they asked us to clarify the difference between grade school and university. So I'm going to clarify it to you right now. In grade school, it's a foundation for kids to grow up and understand certain concepts. In university, it's specialized. Where individuals want to enter a specialized market, that is the difference. No, thank you. But let's then look at another thing, right? They tell you how, at the end of the day, at least under their side, some of them will graduate with better quality. I'll engage with this later in my argument. So their entire case wasn't contingent upon them proving that there are benefits that can exist. Because we concede there are benefits. But their burden today is to prove how those benefits will outweigh all of the harms that can exist with their policy. And although they chuck so many benefits that they want to push onto the table, they still have to prove it, otherwise it will be left standing. And I'm incredibly sorry to say your whip will not make it. So let's look at my speech, right? I'll tell you how exactly you worsen the competition within the job market, as well as these universities that exist under your side. No, thank you, I just started. But let's look at what exactly happens within the status quo, right? The job market is already highly competitive. This was something that they conceded to in their first speech, right? This means that degrees and specialization plays a big role in an interview in determining whether you can actually get that job or not. Which means the more specialized you are, the likelier you are to get that job that you're fighting for. Which is why that many people in the status quo choose to focus on one degree. But it doesn't mean that we're limiting their choice. They can still choose to go for a double degree or more degrees if they choose to, if they're unsure of what they want to opt for after they graduate. It's their choice and we protect that choice. But what happens with their policy? Two things happen. Firstly, they require individuals to take more than one specialized course, meaning there's an influx of students which enter different courses within that university. Because they have to take more than one course, otherwise they will not graduate and they might not even be able to apply for any jobs at the end of the day in that market. That influx doesn't mean there's more students in university, but much more rather more spots are being taken up by existing students within these universities. Meaning, other students who want to enter university will have to fight harder against that influx, which means less students get the opportunity to enter university and specialize in a course they want to take, all on the basis that this requirement exists. The negative effect not only goes to the first person that already exists within a university, but also third parties that want to enter the university in the future, right? You hinder the ability for individuals to specialize or get the degree in something at the rate that they want to get that at, right? Therefore, we believe under our side, not only do we protect the interests of a majority of individuals, not only the existing students, but also future students. Before I continue on to the second harm, like, are there any POIs? None. Okay. So let's look at the second harm, right? For those who are able to graduate with the requirements that they want, in their best case, what happens at the end of the day? That means there's a high influx of individuals who graduate with the ability to enter multiple different job sectors. That sounds great, but there's an inherent harm at the end of the day, right? This means that the competition not only exists in the specialized market they want to go into, but also the safety net that they want to provide at the end of the day. So what happens? You not only make the job market more competitive than it already is, you also require companies to place more emphasis on how good you are at that course. In Dina's speech, she told you how the interest of an individual is incredibly important in determining whether the individual can specialize well in that course or not. Therefore, their side, assuming that everyone will somehow be at the top of their class when they graduate, is not only an assumption that they chose to concede to, but it's also extremely harmful to their case at the end of the day, right? Dina has told you how that is important. Now, considering that the job market is so competitive, they then have to opt out and join the weaker course that they chose and were forced into opting for. This means you limit the ability for a university graduate to find a job because, one, it's already more difficult for them to get the job they actually want, but furthermore, higher competition exists within the safety net that they produce. Meaning, if I was an individual who took 2 degrees, one in medicine and one in psychology, if I don't succeed in getting into the medical sector, I can choose to opt into the psychological sector. But it will still be difficult at the end of the day because there are still other students who have opted for that course and the competition exists anyway. That means if their aim is to tackle unemployment, their burden at the end of the day and their solution is nothing compared to the harms that will exist if they choose this policy. Before that, sure, defend yourself.
What's your ability to value strongly rewarded student market?
Can you please repeat your POI?
What's your ability to value strongly rewarded student market?
Look, at the end of the day, let's say there are individuals who can choose to opt for one course and there is still the choice for individuals to opt for 2 courses. At the end of the day, this means more capable individuals who specialize within that sector can exist. Meaning, there's higher specialization within job markets that exist at the end of the day within that country. Meaning to say, we might have, for example, even in their best case scenario, less people who have more degrees, but we have higher quality workers at the end of the day within the job sector because these individuals will be forced into catering that course that they want to specialize in. So what has Dina told you in her speech? Firstly, she told you how it's not justified for the government to violate an individual's right to choice without a form of justification and without a form of harm that exists at the end of the day. This was something that they refused to engage in at the end of the day, and we believe this was harmful to their case because their entire case is contingent upon them proving it's okay to infringe upon the right of choice of these individuals. Second argument, Dina told you about how at the end of the day, our side produces higher quality graduates compared to their side where they prioritize quantity. We believe under our side, as I've said earlier in my speech, the quality of the workforce would be better, but furthermore, that means it will be more specialized and more individuals are able to get the jobs they actually want, rather than being stuck in a standstill where they are unable to get the job they want and also the job that's in the safety net they provide. Therefore, under our side, just a quick comparison, this means at the end of the day, under our side, university graduates are more able to get the jobs that they want at the end of the day and enter the job sector compared to their side, where these individuals are stuck in a limbo, considering there's higher competition that exists within these job markets. Meaning, you leave these individuals to the expense of pushing away the benefits that can exist. Even though their side is able to achieve their benefit, at the end of the day, let's say their benefits materialize in their best case. The benefit of a specific individual who can succeed in both courses can achieve at the expense of pushing away and disenfranchising individuals who are not so lucky to be able to succeed in both courses at the end of the day. Meaning, not only are their benefits not able to materialize at the end of the day, even in their best case, they further disenfranchise individuals who actually want to succeed in life and who want that job. We're sincerely proud to oppose.
All right, thank you very much for that speech. I call upon the panel substantive speech. Inside government, the government will speak. Yes.
Do I have to speak to the mic? Do I have to speak to the mic? No, I'm being forced. Alright. I don't get what the previous speaker is talking about. Because most of the harms that she's talking about, most of the things like higher competition, most of the things like less job spots are happening in status quo, ladies and gentlemen. The very fact that unemployment rates are high in so many countries already tells you that competition is a natural aspect of how things already happen. But what exactly is our safety net for certain people who take risks, and especially if we want people to take risks as well? Because we have to talk about those people who are really dealt by this motion to begin with. What are the two issues I want in this today's debate? First of all, how do we best value education? I'm going to have 4 layers on that. But secondly, what should the role of education be ultimately, especially if it's going to be one, but on their side about enhancing free choice, there's going to be on our side, where we have the accessibility and the availability of those choices to begin with, even if it goes through means of coercion, and we'll prove that later on. Let's go to the very first issue on how do you best value education. Let's go to the first layer on standards. I have 3 standards. 1, what is the context of all this, especially we're going to talk about different characters in debate and the different actors that you wanted to propose as well. Secondly, we're going to talk about, is there an overwhelming benefit or is there an overwhelming harm, especially that's the burden of both sides in this debate. But thirdly, we're going to prove to you the standard we set in this debate. What is principally the role of education and how exactly we get that kind of educational reform? How do we help as many people as possible if we're going to be accommodating as possible? Let's go to the first deadlock on the context on who is affected and what really happens. Because we talk to you about people like the impoverished, we talk to you about people who are scared of taking risk. And here's where we prove to you that those kinds of people, or those kinds of people like the impoverished, are the ones who have to make coerced choices anyway before they even go to universities. Why? Simply because of certain circumstances, these kinds of people already have to take less risk and make sure that they can go to the markets that are as valued anyway. But they want to tackle the debate where they want to talk about those who don't want to waste their time, like doctors and people who want to take med school anyway. We don't think that the debate even largely depends on that, because if they have the capacity to make sure they can go into med school, if they have the capacity to make sure they can invest so much time in it, we don't know why 2 to 4 years of any extra course is going to harm them anyway. But even if that is going to happen, why exactly is it that that's good? Because there are certain people as well who take so much risk, and we have to provide a safety net anyway. How exactly are you going to deal with people if the problem on their side was that a lot of people are unemployed, if lots of people don't really have access? What's our ability to make them access those kinds of things? So even if we co-opt their character in this debate, we still were able to provide some sort of benefit. That's why my deputy's rebuttal on the last week on the Elo's point about saying the deputy's rebuttal on saying that the deputy's rebuttal on saying that some are afraid to take risk and that some people don't really know what they want was proving to you that the standard on their side of proving what a better life was never even existent. That's why we think that they can't dictate what exactly is a better life by saying that the singular course is always best for everyone, especially if it's saying that some people don't have time. We think that time is subjective towards lots of people as well. And the best way for universities to value that isn't going to happen on their side, where free choice isn't even a choice to begin with. Let's go to the point on why exactly we deal with that deadlock. The reason why we're still able to co-opt their character and the reason why they never respond to the impoverished and those risk takers is simply because we were able to prove to you that those kinds of people also need a safety net. But moreover, even if it's not about the idea of a safety net, these kinds of people also need the accessibility towards certain choices as well. And that's where we go into the deadlock of whether or not there is an overwhelming benefit or an overwhelming harm. What's the overwhelming benefit on our side? I'll take you at 5. On government, we wanted to promote to you their form of education. We want to promote to you the value of labor and how we're going to help accommodate everyone in today's society. But their side wanted to talk about accessibility. Their side pushed to us a burden about how accessibility is the only value we wanted to protect, and that's the only thing we wanted to do. Even if we co-opted that, we're going to do that anyway later on. But they also want to talk about higher quality workers, how we're going to have less jobs, how they're going to promote competition on their side to be even better on their side, right? Let's deal with the harms that they want to present, right? They told us that free choice isn't going to happen because your accessibility is highly dependent on the free choice that you have, especially in university. Here's where we question that. Is your ability to access certain choices really dependent all the time on a singular course anyway, because you freely chose it? We tell you that the reason why this policy has to happen is because choice is only a concept manufactured, the choice is only a value insofar as you're able to access certain avenues anyway and to be free from certain circumstances. And the reason why it's so horrible for them to assume certain things is because they didn't even deal with the fact that lots of these people have different circumstances that were forced to take choices. And they were never able to access it, they were never able to rebut the accessibility point. Because the point of accessibility isn't always to make sure you can always have a free choice, because your free choice going to universities isn't even free most of the time. The reason why you have to be a multi-disciplinary graduate is to make sure that your semester choice is still protected later on. And that's why we think that coercion in this side of scenario is justified anyway. But then they want to prove how we have to have higher quality jobs, how we have to have less competition anyway. We want to question that. On their side, is high quality jobs even existent? The very point of context they conceded to was that labor markets were volatile, that certain markets were undervalued. That very meaning tells you that certain factors are undervalued anyway. Before I go on, sure.
If your safety net is not existent, how will your benefits ever materialize and outweigh the harm being pushed?
But how is the safety net not existent? The very safety net is having these certain courses to begin with. That's a really stupid point. That's why we don't even get what their problem is. Because if their problem was things like competition, that's still found on their side. If their problem was things like less jobs, that's still found on their side. High unemployment rates will still exist on their side, ladies and gentlemen. So they can't just assume that their airy-fairy world will live because certain people chose to take single disciplinary graduate courses. But what did we bring to you on today's side, and why is it an overwhelming benefit, and why is that the burden we're willing to take, right? We told you about how exactly we want to fulfill the best role of education in this side. And we were able to prove to you that coercive systems can exist. So they even could see that coercion can happen. And their only justification of this in grade school and college was that grade school is all about foundation and college is all about specialization. No, college is also a foundation for certain choices that you make in life. Because school in general is one of a foundation of how your life is supposed to work. So your accessibility to certain choices in life is based on a foundation of how school as an entirety works. That's why schools can coerce you to make sure that you have those certain choices later on anyway. So the rest education on our side clearly comes on our side. But the value of labor is something we have to discuss, right? Because the entire rebuttal on the value of labor was basically a cheap shot saying that, oh, the money contradiction point, that we can't cater to subsidies if we can't cater to certain labor markets anyway. The reason why we can't cater to certain labor markets, we're going to clarify it's not a contradiction, is simply because some things are highly valued. Things like management engineering, things like business management are highly valued in society, like in the Philippines. And some things like art, some things like music, or some things like psychology in the Philippines aren't even valued as much. So, the value of labor, especially if certain courses are prioritized, are much more weakened. So the value of labor on their side is never even going to be beneficial anyway, and they had no proof on that. The opposition whip cannot build that point. So how do we help accommodate, and what should be the principal role of education? The principal role of education then isn't always to make sure we can garner the free choice at the very start. It's also to make sure that your own accessibility, that your own labor markets are going to be fine in the later society that you will live in anyway, because it is the foundation of what education should be anyway. Because we proved to you that education should be a foundational role, especially in universities, given that certain choices have to be coerced, we are very proud to win this debate.
Alright, thank you very much for the speech. I call upon the final subjective speech alongside opposition.
We think that we want to settle problems like unemployment. We want to settle problems like the quality of work within the job market. There are certain things that we need to do, and the step to solve these problems isn't to magically increase the number of degrees that a student has, but rather to increase the job market and the amount of jobs that are available within the job market. There are several things that I want to talk about in my speech, right? But two questions in particular, right? First of all, which side better achieves the aim which it appears that everyone wants to achieve, right? And secondly, which side helps more individuals on the ground at the end of the day, especially when they want to talk about people who are impoverished and they want to talk about people who don't want to take risks, right? So first of all, which side better achieves the aim? Now let's clarify what this aim is, right? When they come up and they talk to us about things like unemployment and how people don't have access to certain jobs or how certain industries are more valued than others, we don't find why particularly there is a problem with certain job markets being more valued than others, right? Because we find that, you know, if a certain job has more value than other, then naturally that job market would increase, the industry would grow, and by that nature there would be jobs available for it, right? But more than that,
we find that we want to talk about students who will take multiple degrees, right? There are multiple problems within that in itself, right? And this is something that Audrey came up with to talk to you about, which they never directly engaged with. The only thing they said about people having multiple degrees was that, oh, but people have more access, and suddenly their DPM came up and said that the quality would increase. Why don't we think so, right? There are multiple problems with multidisciplinary degrees in itself, right? Because we find that the nature of it is that when you go into university and you want to do these things, you need to either do it in a certain space of time where you need to fit 2 degrees within that space of time, or 2, you need to expand the time, but in which case you either need to 1, pay more, or in general just waste time which could be used to increase your portfolio or get some job experience, to start getting some money, right? Sit down, I'll take one later, right? But more than that, we tell you that when they want to come out and they talked about better lives for individuals, we don't find how this can happen, right? Because the kind of benefits that they tried to push to us was things like widening the undervalued markets, right? We find that you cannot necessarily widen undervalued markets simply by giving someone a degree. Why so, right? Because if we've already told you why exactly the quality of this degree or the quality of education that this person receives isn't necessarily the best because of the nature of what this student has to go through, right? Because of the nature of what I said earlier about time or money, right? We find that because of this, when you want to talk about undervalued markets, more often than not, after this person has graduated, they will still want to pursue initially with the degree that they wanted to pursue in the first place. Why is this worse under their side, right? Because if a student has 2 degrees, but actually they are only passionate for one and only want to pursue one. However, because of the nature of this multidisciplinary degree, the quality of this education and the quality of his understanding of the market or of the whatever field that they were exploring isn't necessarily as good as it can be under our side. Why so, right? Because when you force every single university graduate to have this kind of multidisciplinary degrees, right? This means that you block out any individuals from focusing their time on only one degree, in which case they get specialized in it better, in which case their work quality will be better and their understanding of the field will be a lot better. I'll take one later, right? But more than that, when they want to try and push to us about reforming education, right, and they want to talk to us about expanding the education, we don't find why this is necessarily good, especially when talk about giving opportunities to people. Why so, right? Because they need to understand that statistically, this means that when you have one person that has to enter 2 different courses, which could have been 2 different people entering 2 different courses, this means that you cut out opportunity from people to even either enter the field or to be able to enter the field that they want to enter to begin with, right? Why is this bad? Because when we find that people have an interest for something or have a passion in something, more often than not, this means that a person's work quality will be a lot better, right? And what does this mean under their side? Because when you force people to, or rather when you decrease the opportunity for a person to enter a particular field within university, this means that when they enter that field or when they find it more difficult to enter that field, the quality of their work at the end of the day will be much worse. This is something that Audrey has brought up, something that Dina has brought up as well, right? Now, secondly, let's go on into which side helps more individuals at the end of the day. But before that, sure, I'll take one. Can you defend your first speaker? Because your first speaker said it was an important choice not to have a free choice. Are you going to then say that certain choices aren't coerced?
Sorry, say that again.
Are you going to then say that certain choices like going for medicine aren't coerced?
Look, when they try to push to us about how people are still coerced at the end of the day and how people are still unemployed at the end of the day, our job isn't to suddenly solve unemployment or to suddenly solve people who are coerced. What we will try to push to and what they've already talked about was how all these things and how all these problems are worse under their side, right? Something which they have failed to defend, and the only defense to this was saying that it only exists under our side as well. However, the scale of this existing under our side is less compared to theirs, something that they need to understand later on, right? But by which time it's already too late. Sit down, right? Now let's talk about impoverished people in general, right? Because when they came up and they talk about impoverished people and how these people are scared to take risks, right? We find that taking this risk is more often than not bad for the nature of the multidisciplinary degrees and how it prevents you from the opportunity from specializing in this degree, how it prevents you from increasing the general quality of a particular industry because these people are forced to take 2 degrees and not 1. Sit down, right? When you want to talk about impoverished people, more often than not, even if you have these subsidies, if you're forcing these people to take more than 1 degree, this obviously means that they need to pay more, even with the subsidies, right? In which case, these poor people might not be able, these impoverished people might not even be able to afford what the government is forcing them to do in the first place, right? But more than that, when you want to talk about these people who want to find a job in a particular industry, right? When you want, again, when it comes to the specialization of these people in these industries, it is important for an impoverished person who wants to succeed in life or to find a job to be able to be good at one thing, so they can strive at that one thing, so they can escape the cycle of poverty that they're in, right? When you force these people to try and suddenly master 2 things at once and think,
claims like if a student can do medicine, obviously 2-4 years extra of something else will not do harm. This is not true, right? Because if you were forced to do more than one thing, something which you do not specialize in to begin with, obviously the quality of the other thing wouldn't be as good, and it will be a waste of a student graduating, and it will be a waste of budget spent on education, right? Then we find that when it comes to things like the job market and how they suddenly wanted to expand the job market by giving people more opportunities and more degrees, right? This is something that Audrey came up with, and the only response that they had to us was that, oh, but under your side, people are still unemployed, right? We don't find this to be adequate. Why so? Because when Audrey came out, what did she talk to you about particularly, right? Because she talked to you about how these people, when they want to enter the job market, it isn't just, these undervalued markets having like, let's say 1,000 people in it, which is currently status quo, but instead now you have 50,000 people in it because every single university graduate was forced to take probably that degree as well, right? In which case, the job market and the competition to get a job would be more difficult because these people would be forced to choose, would have more access, right, whereas they want to place it. But in reality, what this means is that people will be cut out from the opportunity because more people have access to it, right? To clarify what that means, simply to put, basically how people, how if an individual were to have access to more than one thing, this would mean that at the end of the day, when you cut out the opportunity, something that both of my speakers have explained to you, and when you cut out the opportunity to quality, which could increase the things that they want to talk about, things like the job market or things like certain industries within the world, we find that in the situation of specialization, in which case quality will be a lot better, and even in the case of quantity, something that they wanted to raise, we find that in this situation, we still win on that issue because of the nature of multidisciplinary degrees and how this in itself cuts out opportunity from people. If you want the side where quality of work is increased in general, if you want a world where people have the choice to dictate their own lives and not have someone else choose these things for you, then go with side opposition.
Alright, thank you very much for that speech. To wrap up our case, I would like to call upon the final speaker, the opposition side.
If I was an individual living inside government's paradigm, I would rather not go for university. Because I know that me going and me not going still leads to the harms that exist, but further worse, they are perpetuated under their side. So what is the problem that we have with side government's case? We have two problems. Firstly, there was a contradiction within their mechanism when they tell us how they have enough money to put into more subsidies but not expand the job market. The exact solution to the problem they were trying to fight. But the contradiction then came up in their deputy speech when they told you how they refuse to expand the job market because it would be better to provide more courses for more people. But they didn't really provide any analysis in proving to us how that was a better mechanism compared to the status quo, right? So we also felt that it was extremely unfair that they were changing their characterization from each speech as the debate progressed, right? So this made it unfair for us on side opposition as they were constantly changing their stances from each speech. But the second problem we have with their speeches was that they only saw the side of one individual. The only side they saw was the individual who succeed in both courses and succeed in getting that job. But they didn't engage in the various other sides and various other types of individuals that exist in the status quo. For example, people who struggle to even succeed and graduate in one degree, let alone two, or more importantly, the side where people are pushed into unemployment because their side worsens the competition they want to reduce. Why was this harmful to their case? 3 reasons. Firstly, they had to prove how their benefits can materialize. This was something that we pushed to them, but they refused to engage in it, and at the end of the day, they left themselves at a standstill. But secondly, they have to also prove to us how even though there were harms that exist, their benefits would outweigh those harms. However, they failed to engage on this. I'll tell you why later in my speech. But most importantly, it made them seem like the side who did not want to protect the people who are struggling, which sadly made their case and their speeches seem incredibly shallow, which was incredibly sad. But let's look at the lack of responses from their side. Firstly, we told you how under our side we protect the freedom of choice of individuals, meaning to say these individuals can go for one course or multiple courses if they feel like it, right? Their justification for this was that the freedom of choice is violated all the time, so we'll just violate it again. Doesn't really matter. But it still doesn't take down the layers of analysis that Dina presented in her speech And we find it extremely unfortunate. But secondly, we tell you about how under our side, there's a higher quality of workers that will enter the job market at the end of the day. And this was the main clash within today's debate, right? Quantity or quality. So we provided to you with analysis of how under our side, we create more successful individuals who are likelier to succeed in the jobs that they can get, as well as actually get the jobs that are available in the limited job market they conceded to. Their simple response was a different argument, which then directly clashed with our third argument when we told you how it worsens the competition and limits the ability for individuals to succeed. They failed to, in both me and Ali's speech, we told you how at the end of the day, they not only worsen the scenario for individuals within universities, but also future individuals who will go into university and graduate. We've responded to both of their arguments. Firstly, they told you about how the rate of coercion and accessibility under their side will go up and go down. Now, we have already considered in Dina's speech how coercion is something that can't be solved. But even under their side, it's present. The worst part is you give more opportunity for parents to coerce their children into, instead of taking 1 degree, take 2 degrees that their parents want them to take. And Dina has presented analysis on this. And secondly, we told you how their argument on lowering unemployment rate was something that can never materialize, because at the end of the day, the harms that exist will always counter and outweigh the benefits that exist under their side. So the question then becomes, who actually takes today's debate? The side which takes today's debate is the side which protects the majority in the status quo. That majority isn't limited to people who are able to enter university, get those 2 courses and succeed, but everyone who will enter this university at the end of the day. Like what me and Dina have presented to you in our arguments early on in our speeches. That means at the end of the day, eventually, side opposition takes the debate. But worst of all, side government refused to engage, and this, at the end of the day, cost them the debate. We're extremely proud to oppose.
Alright, thank you very much for the speech. We'll talk about the final speaker of this round, the government vice.
Before I move on to my issues, I want to say it's a very dirty tactic to just assume all of these responses at reply and say that your first speaker said them when you never really did. So I'm going to have 2 issues for you today. The first is going to be fulfillment of burdens, and the second is going to be responsiveness of argumentation. The first thing I want to do for the first issue is highlight the goal that we told you at the start of this debate and tell you why they did not fulfill it, or at least give an alternative goal and say why it was more important. So since they didn't, what were the goals we gave you? We told you first, the goal was to make better students and a better educational system. How did we say that we were going to make, let's start with how they said they were going to make better students. The biggest argument they were able to give us was the DLO saying that, you know what, too much competition will just make some people not get the jobs they want, because there are now a lot of smart people, and well, since there are too many smart people to get these jobs, because there are limited job space according to their context, therefore, some people will not get the jobs they want. What were the problems we pointed out to you? We told you, firstly, that argument was completely value neutral, because they conceded that in status quo, the job market is already so tight. So obviously, the idea of people not getting the jobs they want and not everybody getting their ideal job was completely conceivable. It already happens in status quo. But the problem is that it happens on their side too, but they never responded to our point that on our side, even if people don't get the initial job they want, they can settle for the second job that they want, which we said was completely fine, so her argument was just basically restating ours. But even more, we say that their main argument besides that was like, oh, if we were to compare, on our side, we have more graduates. More graduates? Why is that a useful argument if your context says that there are a limited number of spots for employment? Therefore, the argument of having more people to employ is no use if you concede that there are still limited spots for employment. That's why we told you that on the comparative, even if we have less people who are going to take these jobs, at least they are people who are more trained and more specialized in whatever they pick. The second, on making a better education system, we said we made incentives to reform and improve the teaching staff, so that we can improve better education, make more slots for people, because now we know that there's demand, we can make competition in universities. What did they say? Nothing. So let's go on to the second issue. So, responsiveness of argumentation. What are 3 things that we find very problematic with them? Firstly, the previous speaker on her reply tells us that, we had a very shifty characterization from the first to the third speaker. no response as to what exactly those characterizations were. So how are we supposed to assume what those were? What we did do was engage their context. We told you that a lot of their arguments, Mr. Chair, only fly under one characterization, which they and we also responded to. The idea that the person they're talking about does not like the second course. But in all other cases, our arguments, and even in that case, so in all other cases, that harm doesn't fly. Because if you like your second course, then it's going to help you, like your other subjects. So the quality of that harm to even exist only exists in 1 out of 4 cases, therefore it should be dismissed. Secondly, our whip raised the point to the other whip saying that circumstances like being impoverished are already naturally coercive. So why is it that you encourage this style of people only choosing one specific course for their education? They didn't respond, Mr. Chair. The only thing they told us is like, no, people just should have the freedom to choose their passions, and argued that the right to choice and the right to choose whatever course you want is an absolute good in itself. What did we tell you? We said that you should have the right to choose what courses you want, but we say that the ability to act upon those choices and feel good about those choices is only good in as much as you have a fallback in case your choice was wrong. That's why we said that in order to respond to those things, they had to bite the bullet. They had to say that their students would be of less quality. They said that they had to say that they would not reform the education system as much. They did not engage, they did not weigh, and they lose this debate. Thank you.